Winona, thank you again. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thanks so much.
So, Winona, we recently held a town hall right after the election with supporters across the country, and one of the questions we asked was, "How are you feeling?" So, Winona, let's start there. Tell us how you are feeling right now with where we are at in the country.
Well, I'm feeling good. First and foremost, I'm feeling relieved, even though we know that Trump is still going to cause trouble. But I'm still feeling hopeful for the future. And after the last 4 years, I feel in a much better place. It has been infuriating, it's been stressful and exhausting. I mean, we've had to fight for every single day on multiple fronts to protect the things we care about. But I'm proud of what we accomplished. We really led the resistance in the fight for food, water, and climate. And I'm proud that we've had so many concrete victories, especially in light of COVID. I feel a real sense of accomplishment because we made a real difference. And I'm not exaggerating when I say we saved lives. I'm feeling cautiously optimistic about the next 4 years. It's going to be really refreshing to have an administration that is at least movable on the issues that we work on. We have the chance to start doing the important groundwork that we need to make policy changes at the federal level. Climate change is threatening the things we need to live, and that includes food and water, everything that we depend on. We have a very specific and ambitious plan for making the change we need happen. Now we need to implement those plans like our lives depend on it, because they do. We all know that we're going to have to push President Biden and other leaders to be bolder and more ambitious than he and they are comfortable with. We've already seen some disappointing signs, including the appointment of fossil fuel apologists to key positions. But, we're still in the early days. We're going to have to be vigilant. But one thing was clear to me coming out of the election: timid positions just do not win. They never have, and they never will. And we're going to push the incoming administration to avoid timidity and hold them accountable for keeping their promises. Fortunately, pushing leaders to be bold and holding them accountable are two things that Food and Water Watch does better than any other group out there.
I couldn't agree more. And, Winona, how do you see our role changing in this new political climate?
Well, our role continues to expand. It's becoming more urgent, more central to the national conversation. Like I said, for the first time in years, we have a real chance to make real changes at the federal level. Last year, we had not one, but two major national bills in Congress to ban fracking and to stop dangerous fossil fuel infrastructure. Next year and in the coming years, our role will be to build the power we need to get those bills passed and signed into law. And that's not to mention bills like the Water Act, that's going to modernize our crumbling water infrastructure, and the groundbreaking Farm System Reform Act that's going to put that national web of insidious factory farms in check once and for all. I mean, we just have so much to do and such a huge opportunity for decisive and lasting victories.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Winona, can you tell us what our team has been doing since the election and how we are planning for this new future?
Well, I'd love to say that we've been busy celebrating since November 4th, but that's just not the truth. In reality, we got busy from the first day after the election to push the incoming administration to take the urgent action on climate we all know we need. We've been planning for many, many months to hit the ground running in a new Biden administration. We made specific plans, both short-term and long-term ones, for our work under the new administration. In the short term, we're already pushing for President Biden to take some decisive actions in his first 100 days in office. President Biden has huge power to make immediate change. Our team has been doing the groundwork to see what he can actually do. We're talking about things like using his considerable executive power to make sure his appointees are absolutely free from the corrupt influence of the fossil fuel industry. We need people who believe in science and facts to lead at every level of government. And we're going to make sure that the incoming administration appoints people to key roles who understand the need to move off of fossil fuels. We're going to unfrack the cabinet.
So that's great, Winona. And what else will we be pushing President Biden to do in his first 100 days?
Well, we're going to make sure that President Biden keeps his promise to ban fracking on public lands and that he declares a climate emergency. We're going to be pushing him to block new drilling leases on federal land and in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And from there, we're going to keep working to ban fracking nationally. President Biden can eliminate bad regulatory rollbacks, such as restoring the Clean Water Protections and the National Environmental Policy Act, things that the Trump administration impacted. We're targeting any and all Trump regulatory and executive actions that need to be undone immediately. And we're looking proactively at new executive actions that we're going to push President Biden to issue once he takes office. And of course, we're going to call on him to halt water shutoffs. Everybody needs water during the pandemic. The election of Joe Biden isn't a moment to rest. It is a moment to redouble all of our efforts. And I think that Mitch and Emily are going to be able to share more details on some of the important items on our long-term agenda. Needless to say, though, we are incredibly busy now, and we're going to stay busy for the next 4 years, busy winning.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Winona. We are so, so grateful for your leadership and vision. And I know, Winona, you're sticking around with us now, and you'll also you'll come into the rooms later. So
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you.
So we're looking forward to talking with Mitch and Emily. But before we jump to Mitch, I would really just ask you to please consider donating today. As Winona mentioned, we have really big plans for Biden's first 100 days and for well beyond those first days. If you haven't already included us this year, and I know many of you have, I recognize many names today, and I thank you all who have already included us this year. But if you haven't, please donate today. We'll include a link in the chat, or you can text Our Future to 69866. If you donate before December 31st, your gift will be matched 2 for 1. That's tripling your impact. Now let's get on to Mitch Jones, our policy director. Welcome, Mitch.
Thank you, Tamara. Great to be here.
Wonderful. So Mitch, we just heard from Winona about our role and what we are doing to gear up for the changing administration. So why don't you tell us where you see climate policy moving in the coming years and how we will play a role?
Well, Tamara, obviously we're still waiting to see what the outcome of the Senate runoff elections in Georgia are going to be, and that's going to determine which party is in control of the Senate. But, let's be honest, even if the Democrats are in charge, a 50-50 Senate doesn't really leave a comfortable margin to enact the policies that we really need to fight climate change. So, as Winona said, where we're starting is by urging President-elect Biden to keep his campaign promise, and it was a campaign promise, to issue an executive order that would ban new fossil fuel extraction, including fracking, on all public lands and waters. This order would also phase out existing extraction on public lands and waters over time. But in addition to that, we're also asking him to use his executive authority to declare a climate emergency, because honestly, we're in one. And this would give the government even more authority to directly combat climate change and end climate destroying practices like exporting fossil fuels, such as fracked liquefied natural gas or LNG. But even if Biden takes these steps, we still really need federal legislation to fully address the severity of the climate crisis. So we're also moving forward with our plan to push leaders in Congress to take bold action. Now, ironically, while the Democratic caucus in the House lost members, and as of today, with the appointment of Marcia Fudge to the Housing and Urban Development Department, the majority is only about 5 seats. Our power and influence has actually grown in the next Congress because, as Winona said, the candidates who lost are the ones who took the weakest positions on the issues we're fighting for.
So Mitch, tell us more about what we are doing in Congress.
So in Congress, we're working with a variety of members from all over the country who actually are committed to push directly to confront the fossil fuel industry in any climate legislation that might move. So we're working with them to draft comprehensive legislation that would phase out fossil fuels swiftly, that would ban fracking everywhere, not just on public lands, that would end fossil fuel exports, and that would stop new pipelines and power stations. And beyond that, we're going to continue to build political power in districts of members of Congress who hold the leadership positions that will be key in passing that legislation. So on the one hand, we're working closely with our champions, and on the other, we're pushing the folks who really need to be pushed. We're also demanding, what we're doing is we're demanding that Joe Biden do what he can to confront the climate crisis immediately on day one. And then also, given these narrow margins in both chambers, again, no matter what happens in Georgia, we're going to be using this 117th Congress to build momentum and political power to expand that group of Hill allies and champions with an eye on winning the major victories that we need in confronting the fossil fuel industry in the 118th Congress.
Great. So, Mitch, we also, and Winona mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we also work on federal policy to protect and provide affordable water for all. I'd love it if you could just tell us what we're doing in the coming year, and perhaps to give us a very brief history lesson for everyone on the Water Act.
You sure you want it to be brief? So back in 2015, we started working with offices on the Hill to draft legislation, the Water Act, that would fully fund our water and wastewater utilities. The EPA had identified a funding gap of $35 billion a year. That's billion with a B. Wow. And instead of increasing funding from Washington, localities are being forced to jack up water rates, or they've been turned to the false promise of water privatization, handing over their utilities to for-profit water companies that actually our research has shown cut service and increase water rates even further. We call it profit at the tap. We were and we still are in the midst of a water affordability crisis in this country. And the legislation that we wrote, which we're not supposed to say out loud, so let's keep that between us, would raise $35 billion, again with a B, to actually fund our local water utilities. It would also provide funding to schools to test for lead in their water, and would provide funds for them to repair their pipes, replace their pipes if lead is found. It provides money to tribal governments to expand access to water within their jurisdictions. And in the current Congress, for the first time ever, we actually had the Water Act introduced not only in the House, but also in the Senate. And we added provisions to help people in communities that are struggling with contamination from forever chemicals like PFAS. So for the Water Act, we've actually already spoken with our bill sponsors, and we're ready to introduce the bill again early in this next Congress. And we're currently working to push Democratic leadership to include the Water Act in the infrastructure bill that all of Washington believes is going to be coming early in the next year.
Great. No, that's wonderful. That's really exciting. Mitch, can you also just tell us a little bit more? We're obviously very much still living in a pandemic, and
Yeah.
I was hoping you could just talk a little bit more about the water moratorium shut-off campaign that's been so incredibly important during this time.
Yeah, so we are continuing our efforts to get a nationwide moratorium on water shutoffs during the pandemic. And as Winona mentioned, this work really has saved lives. At the height of our campaign, you know, over 2/3 of the country was protected from moratorium, or sorry, from shutoffs. But since then, a lot of the local and statewide moratoriums have lapsed. And so we're continuing our efforts nationwide. You know, People have been losing their jobs during the pandemic, and water rates have continued to actually increase during the pandemic. And during this, we've been leading this effort to stop utilities from shutting off water to people who can't afford their bills. The CDC has said that one of the most important things you can do to fight the spread of the pandemic or the illness is to wash your hands. Yet people are still getting their water shut off during the pandemic. We recently sent a letter to the CDC asking them to use their authority to issue a moratorium, and they replied that people can use hand sanitizer or dirty water. You know,
Wow.
Seriously, I'm not making this up. It was
Unbelievable.
surreal. So, what we're seeing here is a real direct connection now between the water affordability crisis and our current public health crisis. People can't afford their bills, people get their water shut off and can't wash their hands. So, language to stop these shutoffs was included in the HEROES Act, which passed the House many months ago, but has been stalled by Mitch McConnell in the Senate. And we're currently working right now, as we speak here, to include a shutoff moratorium in any end of the year relief legislation that passes. This is being negotiated now, and we're pushing for it now. But failing that, as Winona mentioned earlier, we're going to demand that President-elect Biden issue an executive order to the CDC to issue that moratorium.
Wait, Mitch, should you even be here right now? It sounds like you should be doing that.
Luckily, we have a great staff who's working on that.
All right. So, as a dairy farmer's daughter, I also want to highlight our work to protect our food. So, can you just tell us where you see our team playing a role in passing legislation to ban factory farms and to help our family farmers across this country?
Definitely, and as a dairy farmer's grandson, I'm really excited for the work that we're doing. We have active state level campaigns to put moratorium on concentrated animal feeding operations, or CAFOs, in both Iowa and Oregon. Federally, we've been working closely with Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey and Representative Ro Khanna of California on the Farm System Reform Act. So now this really is landmark legislation that would place an immediate moratorium on the construction of new or the expansion of large factory farms, and would also initiate a phase out of existing large factory farms by 2040. In addition to that, it would provide $100 billion, again with a B, dollars a year, or dollars for farmers to be bought out and to have debt forgiveness. That would be spread out over about a decade. And along with this, it has programs for transitioning farmers to alternative and healthy agricultural activities like pasture-based livestock, like specialty crop cultivation, or organic production. It's really kind of modeled on what we did for tobacco farmers when we transitioned them off of tobacco and into other farming. So it really is a transformational piece of legislation. And we're coming back to this legislation in the next Congress. There was a meeting just this morning with the bill sponsors, and we're going to work with our allies across the country to continue to build support for that bill. In addition to that, we've been working closely again with Senator Booker, but also with Representative Mark Pocan of Wisconsin on a bill called the Food and Agribusiness Merger, Moratorium, and Antitrust Review Act, which is
That's
a mouthful. It's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. We might need to reconsider the name of that one. But this legislation really, really is essential for beginning to break up the consolidation that we see within our food system. This concentration of corporate power has caused farm income to decline, wages to stagnate, food worker benefits to degrade, layoffs to increase, and grocery store prices to inflate. And while that's been happening, farmers are seeing less and less of the money, and local and rural communities are being devastated by this corporate power. It's ravaged our food system, and it's ravaged rural communities across America. So this legislation would initiate a moratorium, which seems to be my favorite word today, on large agriculture, food and beverage manufacturing, and grocery retail mergers. And it also would require an official assessment of the impact that corporate consolidation has on farmers, on workers, on consumers, and on our communities. But also, we are looking at the possibility of having President-elect Biden issue an executive order that could stop these mergers on its own. So, we're going to continue to push both of these pieces of legislation to reform our food system and break the concentrated power of a handful of giant agribusinesses that they have over our food system. So, across the issues on which we work, we're coupling our work to push Congress to pass bold legislation that meets the demands of the various crises that we face, while also pushing the Biden administration to use its authority to begin to fight climate change, stop water shutoffs, and begin to roll back the corporate concentration in our food system.
Mitch, thank you. Seriously, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now let's welcome Emily Wirth. Emily is our Managing Director of Organizing. Thank you so much for joining us, Emily.
It's great to be with you.
Yay. So, of course, we're running late in the program again. I don't know how that happened, but we're going to make plenty of time for you, and we'll still have plenty of time to break out into our rooms. So we just heard from Mitch and Winona, but I wanted to talk with you about our state and local work. So before we get into it, can you please remind folks where we have staff located on the ground?
Of course, yeah, we have staff members located in strategic places across the country, including New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, Florida, Illinois, Iowa, New Mexico, California, and actually a few other places in between too. We try to locate our offices and our staff in the places where we can make the most difference, and that's either in supporting and winning important local or state fights, or contributing to the work that Mitch and Winona mentioned we're doing at the federal level to pressure specific members of Congress in their home districts, or in some cases, both of those things.
Great. So Emily, how do you see our organizing teams in the states adjusting their plans to the Biden administration and perhaps maybe even new local or state leaders in their area?
Yeah, so like Winona mentioned, the election of Joe Biden is no time for us to relax. It's actually the opposite is true. It's time for us to really double down on the campaigns that we know will make a real difference in the next 4 years and beyond. And if anything, I know our organizers and staff feel an added urgency now that Biden is president-elect. We know that these next 4 years will be our best and perhaps the last chance to stop some of the worst effects of climate chaos. And so we're working hard, as Winona said, to develop plans to pressure President-elect Biden to take strong executive action. And that's really going to start with keeping his promise to ban fracking on public lands. And, that's really a continuation of a campaign that we helped to kick off under the Obama administration. So we're well suited to pick back up with that. At the local and the state level, it's been our approach for years to support and help candidates who are ready to kind of take back our political power from corporations to get elected. And every year we've been helping to get more of these champions to join our ranks. And this past election was no different. we had some big wins up and down the ballot, from Mondaire Jones' congressional victory in New York to the election of a local champion, Carmen Ramirez, to the Board of Supervisors in Ventura County, California. And I want to mention a little more about this win because it was really crucial for local families affected by the oil industry, but really significant for all of California and really everyone trying to take on the fossil fuel industry. Ventura County has the third most drilling and the second most fracking in all of California. And we supported Carmen Ramirez because she was really supportive of measures that had been passed to stop fracking and oil drilling near residents' homes and schools. And so the industry saw this as an opportunity to try to defeat her and take over the board to defeat those measures. And so they did not go quietly in this election. They spent nearly $1 million to try to defeat her, to roll back that progress. But we out-organized, out-strategized, and out-mobilized them, and we won that election. So it was really exciting.
Yeah, very, very exciting. Our work through Food and Water Action that did that is so great, so very great. So Emily, thank you so much for sharing those examples. I would love to hear also, what are some of the priorities for our teams across the country and how do they support our ability to pass federal legislation?
Great. Yeah, as always, we're working to mobilize people to build the political power we need for protecting our food, water, and climate for future generations. But we're running campaigns in key locations across the country next year to support that agenda. And a lot of that's happening at the state level. So we'll be pushing to stop all new fossil fuel infrastructure projects in states like New York and New Jersey and pushing back against some big fossil fuel projects in Virginia. We're pushing Governor Newsom to stop issuing all new permits on fracking in California. We'll be running campaigns to support state legislation to stop new factory farms in Oregon, in Iowa, and New Mexico. And at the local level, we work in cities to maintain our right to safe, affordable public water, kind of like some of the work Mitch mentioned. And then all of this local and state work will help build our political power and make our push for progress at the federal level possible. We need to work now to be building power to pass the federal legislation in the next Congress that Mitch mentioned. And so we'll be strategically building power to make that happen.
So Emily, one more thing. I was hoping that you could also mention our new volunteer program and perhaps how folks can get more involved with that.
Yeah, I'm super excited to share that in the coming year, we're going to be focusing on expanding our volunteer program across the country. And this is to build towards that vision of this essential federal climate legislation that we need to pass next year. So we'll be working now to build support for a ban on fracking everywhere, but starting with our public lands campaign. And we know that to accomplish these big policy changes, we're going to have to involve and organize people all across the country. And so that's where this volunteer program is going to come in to get people really engaged. And, right now we see as like an all hands on deck effort. And so I just invite you all to join us. I think we're going to share a link in the chat for how you can get involved immediately in an initiative to reach out to elected officials to support a ban on fracking, but there'll be much more to come. And so I invite you all to sign up and join us.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I know, thank you both, Emily and Mitch. And I know you're going to be around in one of the rooms. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right, great. So before we jump into our smaller group discussions with our regional team members, and I do hope that many of you will stick around for that, I want to make just one last pitch. As you heard from Mitch, Emily, and Winona, we have a lot to do. And next year will really be a change moment, and we are very, very ready. So if you haven't already, please make a gift today. You will make it possible to pass climate legislation, to fight for affordable and clean water, and to ban factory farms. We've included the link in the chat, and you can, of course, also text our future to 69866.